In honor of the men and women of the armed forces of the United States who served in the Vietnam War, the names of those who gave their lives and those who remain missing are inscribed in the order they were taken from us. Our nation remembers the courage, sacrifice, and devotion to duty and country of its Vietnam veterans. This memorial was built with private donations from the American people, November 11th, 1982. These words, the only ones actually carved by a stonecutter into the black granite wall, set the stage for the true life drama represented by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The monument was constructed to honor the dead and missing from what was one of the most controversial wars in the history of the United States of America. So controversial, in fact, that the American people found it difficult to welcome and embrace those returning home from the dark, foreboding jungles of this Southeast Asian country. So controversial that it took over a decade for us to finally honor the memory of those who unselfishly gave their lives fighting for their country, ideals of democratic society, and for us. This wall was the veterans' answer to America's lack. A reminder to the people of this great country that freedom is not a simple guarantee, but an ultimate goal that has been fought for and earned over the centuries. As one walks the length of this beautiful, shimmering edifice, that lesson slowly begins to sink in. We see the names of young men and women gradually rising to a height of 10 feet above us, and it is simply impossible not to be overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the sacrifices they made. Each year of the war, represented by the wall's mirrored finish panels, took more and more precious American lives. Like a catalog of time, never before has a monument brought the emotional turmoil of a war so close to home, or made it seem so real for each and every one of us. Gazing at their names, we can almost hear their stories calling out to us, stories of fear and bravery, of darkness and light, of despair and hope. True heroes telling us their tales. As we pass the thousands of names embossed in stone, we also see ourselves and the world around us reflected on the wall's surface. As we look at ourselves and see the names of the dead beneath our reflections, we know that the world has become a better place for all of us because of the deeds of these men and women and those like them throughout history. To all who lost their lives, to all who loved them, and to all who fought with them, this video is dedicated. May the fire and idealism of this fight remain alive in all of us as we read the names of our lost countrymen. We salute those unfathomably brave men and women, the entire country sharing in a common bond, standing together in the shadow of the wall. As the Vietnam Veterans Memorial began construction, people from all over the country journeyed to the site. The war had many casualties, and it was obvious from the outset that the people it affected were in dire need of something to begin the healing, some emotional release that they hoped the wall would provide. Veterans, their families, and friends soon began flocking to the construction site, and in this early stage of the monument's life, a very important tradition was born: the leaving of precious mementos at the wall. Finding a tremendous need to leave something of themselves behind with their lost loved ones, one veteran even left his brother's Purple Heart within the very foundations of the wall itself. To walk up and touch the name of a lost friend or loved one, to feel the letters etched into the stone, this act is crucial to those who come to the wall. A grieving mother reaching up to touch the name of her young son. An old buddy saying hello and goodbye one last time. A wife yearning to caress her husband's face, running her fingers along the cut edges of his name. It is like no other monument ever built. Not some high and mighty construction hovering untouchable above the crowds, but a memorial to be touched, to be felt. An interactive memorial that is the mediator between the over 58,000 men and women who fought and died in a country thousands of miles away and those who still miss them at home. It averages an astounding 10,000 visitors per day as the wounds of the nation are slowly healed. Jan Scruggs was one of the fortunate returning home from Vietnam in 1969. A wounded and decorated veteran, Scruggs was a member of the Army 199th Light Infantry Brigade. 10 years after returning home, Mr. Scruggs saw what would become the catalyst for the building of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Michael Cimino's moving and violent film, The Deer Hunter. But surprisingly, it was not the film's horrifying depiction of the war itself that haunted Scruggs' mind. It was the film's portrayal of blue-collar youth in a small coal town, believing in, fighting for, and eventually being abandoned by their country that aroused the nightmares in his subconscious. That night, unable to sleep, all he could think about were the faces and memories of all the friends he had fought with and lost during the war. And then one horrifying thought came to him. What if no one would ever remember their names? This, the cruelest one of all, was something that Jan Scruggs could not just tolerate. The next morning, Mr. Scruggs began what would turn into a 6-year battle to build something that would assure that no one would ever forget a single name of anyone who died or is still missing because of the Vietnam War.
The idea for a Vietnam Veterans Memorial came to me while in graduate school when I was studying psychology and the psychological effects of the Vietnam War. In 1979, I began the project in earnest, a project to build a national memorial in the center of Washington, D.C., engraved with the names of all 58,000 who had given their lives during the war in Vietnam. The project was off to a rather slow start. Initially, we had only raised $144.50 in the first 3 months of the effort. It was a rather embarrassing situation, but finally a team of volunteers emerged and we put together a plan, a business plan, a public relations plan, and a political plan. A political plan to get 2 acres of land next to the Lincoln Memorial here in the nation's capital.
Congress declared Memorial Day 1979 as the official beginning of Vietnam Veterans Week. A meeting of veterans to make plans for this celebration was the forum Scruggs chose to unveil his idea of the memorial. Surprisingly, at that time, many of the veterans in attendance did not take the idea seriously. But Scruggs remained undaunted, and a veteran named Robert Dubeck, a lawyer and a former intelligence officer in Vietnam, persuaded him to form a non-profit corporation to raise money for the memorial. On April 27, 1979, after selling off his land in order to raise the money needed to start, Scruggs launched the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, an official non-profit corporation in the District of Columbia. After 5 weeks, however, only $144.50 had been raised. In came John Wheeler, another veteran and lawyer who helped to organize a group of businessmen, all of whom were veterans, into a cohesive lobbying effort to raise money and support for the project.
I just cannot ever understand fully how such a wonderful man as Jan Scruggs came to the forefront. A very humble, indeed a shy individual, a corporal who had been wounded in Vietnam, but somehow he received the message and he's dedicated basically much of his life. One of my great rewards throughout this has been to establish a friendship. And when he approached me to help him and others, I said I would only do it if I could serve as a corporal in the rear ranks of his group to bring about the memorial's creation. And of course, we had the mature wisdom of Mac Mathias, United States Senator from Maryland, man whom I've known for many, many years, who was my senior in the Senate at that time. And we felt that Maryland, Virginia, being the states that embraced the greater metropolitan area where the memorial would be and the nation's capital, we should lead the legislative efforts, and indeed we did that. And much is owing to Mathias because we had to forge ahead against the high odds, particularly to get this extraordinary site right there at the shadow of Abraham Lincoln and then the Washington Monument as a beacon. But it was done, and many, many people in this city joined to make it happen.
Senators Pete Domenici and Charles Mathias introduced legislation to designate a construction site for the memorial.
And Jan asked me, would I be willing to introduce a bill to authorize the construction of a Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. The exact location was not clear. We thought of several places, but the authority of the Congress would be necessary if it was to be put on public land anywhere in a prominent location in Washington. And I agreed to do it, and we began to draft the language of the bill, and then we began to think about other members of the Senate who would be co-sponsors. One of the days that I remember particularly in the planning process for the monument was the day that the site was selected. Obviously, where the monument was going to be built was going to be an important question because the location would signify so much about how the American people felt about the sacrifices that had been made by Americans in Vietnam. It couldn't be in some hidden corner of the city of Washington. It couldn't be buried away somewhere behind the bushes. It had to be in just the right location.
On July 1st, 1980, after unanimous passage of this legislation through Congress, a special bill signing ceremony was held in the Rose Garden at the White House. Over 150 members of Congress, representatives of veterans organizations, and Vietnam veterans, many in wheelchairs, endured 100-degree heat as they watched President Jimmy Carter sign the bill into law.
Since I've been living in the White House and working in the Oval Office, I've known of very few unanimous resolutions or actions by the United States Senate. But it's especially fitting that this resolution and the effort to provide a suitable memorial for those who fought and died for our nation during the Vietnam War should have such broad and bipartisan support. My wife, Rosalind, for instance, has joined as one of the co-chairpersons with many others on the sponsoring committee of the Vietnam Memorial Fund. I particularly want to acknowledge the dedication of Jan Scruggs, who began this effort formally after years of preliminary work in April of 1979, in the leadership of Senator Mathias, Senator Warner, Congressman Bonnier and Dashley, and Chairman Bumpers and Chairman Nedzi and Congressman Hammerschmidt, and many others, who led the legislation successfully through the Congress.
The site would be a 2-acre plot of land near the Lincoln Memorial in the Constitution Gardens. With the help of every conceivable type of fundraiser from every corner of the United States, the money was slowly being raised, and the memorial's construction was in sight.
It was very difficult to get money, particularly from the private sector, to build this memorial. And in response to your question, yes, I did have a role in that, but I do remember so vividly at that time I was married to a very wonderful and fine woman, Elizabeth Taylor, an actress, and I sponsored a breakfast at my home early in the morning, 7:30, bringing in a number of outstanding citizens whom I felt would respond to a request for money. And halfway through the breakfast, I had raised X dollars, which was a reasonable sum, and then unexpectedly my then wife joined, and the number of dollars tripled. But those dollars at that critical point made the difference between bankruptcy and fading out of existence of this struggling foundation and going forward. And that was the money that pulled it out of bankruptcy and started it again. That breakfast and several others that other persons held at that critical period in time.
Now the only obstacle to overcome was approving a design for the memorial itself. To accomplish this difficult task, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund announced a design competition in 1980, open to any American over the age of 18. On March 31st, 1981, the competition's entry deadline, those jurors begin the arduous task of deliberating over the record-breaking 1,421 designs which were submitted. An aircraft hangar was needed to house all of the designs which were required to meet strict criteria. 1 month later, the jurors presented their unanimous selection to the Fund's Board of Directors. The first prize was awarded to entry number 1026, a design by a young woman named Maya Ying Lin, a student at Yale University and the daughter of Chinese immigrants. On May 6, 1981, came the first public display of the winning entry. The design was very simple and very beautiful. Two 246-foot walls of mirror-finished black granite joined in a V. Starting at ground level, the walls would reach 10 feet at their vertex, with one wall pointing toward the Washington Monument and the other pointing toward the Lincoln Memorial. The names of all of those lost in Vietnam, either confirmed dead or still missing, would be inscribed in the order they were taken from us. The names appeared on the wall in chronological order, beginning with Dale Buis, an advisor killed on July 8, 1959, and ending with Richard Van de Geer, killed on May 15, 1975. The name of Harry G. Kramer, killed 2 years earlier than Dale Buis, has since been added. Because the names on each of the walls, 140 panels, are listed in this way, each panel represents groups of veterans who were lost or died together. Their names and stories bound to each other for eternity, a poignant reminder of the sacrifices these men and women made together and as individuals. The design did not go unchallenged, however, as many groups rose up against it. In the September 18, 1982 edition of the National Review, a publication highly regarded by Washington conservatives, the design for the memorial was referred to as Orwellian glop. This sarcastic quote seemed to energize the opposition to the design, and those with more opposing viewpoints began crawling out of the woodwork. Although many veterans came forward to defend and support the design, their comments seemed to fall upon deaf ears in the press. Stories of veterans attacking the memorial became big news, while stories of those praising it were seen as boring. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund became mired in negative publicity, and its opponents got closer and closer to victory.
The culmination of all of the planning and processes and difficulty in getting approval, the Secretary of Interior, going through the governmental agencies, and getting the Fine Arts Commission to approve the concept and design would have gone for naught if we had not been able to have a civilized meeting with those dissenters who had designated themselves as the representatives of the people. They had gone so far as to take polls, to have consensus, to have other people come in and represent their views as being against this memorial design. Senator Warner asked that we all assemble in his office with a view toward reconciling these differences and coming up with a consensus so we could move forward in constructing the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It is important that we recognize that this was the critical juncture in this memorial's life. Everything had been done to this point except to move ahead and get on with the construction, the groundbreaking, and the ceremony dedicating the memorial. We had almost stalled out, and sensing this, the senator had us all come in because the dissension was running amok. Daily articles in the paper, the black gaseous shame, Mei-Ling being an Asian, not being fit to represent it, not having any combat experience, not served in the war, all of these things, the fact that the memorial looked like the peace symbol, all of these visions and all of this dissent and all this bitterness was being heaped on a memorial.
Controversy threatened the memorial's construction, and Scruggs knew that a compromise had to be reached to ensure its survival. Scruggs and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund had come so close to doing the impossible. They had privately raised over $8 million, with donations coming from over 300,000 Americans nationwide, and with absolutely no financial help from the government to build the wall. They received unanimous approval to use one of the most prized and sacred pieces of land in the country for the memorial. They then mounted a huge design competition and emerged with a design for the memorial which was unanimously approved by a highly respected jury of artists. Now, after all the obstacles had seemingly been cleared, they were one compromise away from seeing the entire project completely destroyed.
Throughout these proceedings, there were rumblings of the black gaseous shame, and it was going to be a black hole, and it was not going to represent anybody, and it looked like the victory signal, and it's a Flower Children's design, and Mei Ling shouldn't have been permitted to participate in the process. After hearing more of this than I could stand, I took the floor and told everyone that I thought it was time we stopped speaking in racial terms, that we had learned enough in the trauma of the Civil Rights Movement to know that black was not a color of shame, and that this monument and its materials had been selected because they were the best, and that we should stop acting bigoted and insensitive and leave Mei Ling alone. She had won this in a fair and open competition, and I resented the fact that anyone would talk about this young woman's heritage in relationship to this memorial. And we ought to get on with the task of trying to get the best memorial we could for the United States of America, where we all could recall what happened during this very challenging era in our country's history. That seemed to have gotten everyone's attention. It seems to have brought us back in focus. And to some people's way of thinking, this was a critical juncture where we got off the dime and everybody started marching to the same drummer. And the mood became, how do we get it done, not how do we destroy it.
Finally, on January 27, 1982, that compromise was made as the Memorial Fund agreed with opposition groups to add an American flag and a statue to the existing design concept. On March 26, 1982, an emotional ceremony was held as 120 veterans representing every state in the Union broke ground in a symbolic gesture of unity and began the building process which would cause a great healing in the hearts of people throughout the United States of America. After the body of the wall itself had been constructed, a task requiring that concrete pilings be built 35 feet into the bedrock below, the granite panels were sent to Memphis, Tennessee, where the names of the dead and missing were engraved using a computerized process called photo stencil grit blasting. None of the names were carved by hand, but were sandblasted according to the computer's guidelines by students at a local Memphis art school. As all of the panels were completed, the planning of a national dedication for the memorial began. It was decided that this would take place during the National Salute to Vietnam veterans, which was held during the week of Veterans Day, 1982. Since that first Veterans Day of the wall's existence in 1982, ceremonies for the dead and missing have been held at the wall on every Memorial Day and Veterans Day. Those affected by the Vietnam War in America, and there were many, waited a very long time to experience the kind of emotion that the wall can provide. Like meeting up again with an old friend, veterans who come to the wall can finally illuminate the memories that have darkened their lives for so long. They come to talk, to touch, to release all of the anger and sorrow that was built up inside of them, all within the comforting shadows of their friends and comrades lost. Families and friends of these departed heroes who have always held the fond memories of their lives close to their hearts now, at last, have a way to help deal with their deaths.
My first visit to the Vietnam Memorial was on Gold Star Mother's Sunday in September of 1987. I was stricken at first by the enormity of the wall and the impact of all those names on the panels. The concept was so overpowering. We placed flags at the base of the wall that Sunday morning at 6 o'clock. When I located Peter's name on panel 28, line 29, I remembered how we chose his name. We were so careful about it, so proud of our 7-pound, 11-ounce boy born on St. Patrick's Day. We thought he had it made. And here his name on the wall because of that awful day in October the 17th, 1967. He was a really nice boy. His friends remembered him as a boy who was where the fun was. And a neighbor of his girlfriend remembered how good he was to her children. And a boy who had been in school with him. Unbeknownst to one another, they were in Nam together. And when he heard a laugh, and he said, "That can't be anyone but Pete Penfold," and that was who it was. They got together that day. He was a tank driver for the 3rd Marines. He was hit by a sniper as he was loading. He was the only one in his company who was killed. His lieutenant came and told us about it afterwards. My subsequent visits have impressed me in other ways, realizing the number of lives sacrificed. 14 panels in 10 months. My friend's brother was killed in January of '67, and that was 14 panels to October of '67. So many in such a short time. But it has become a healing place, as Jan has hoped.
The wall provides a profound physical link between the memories of the departed souls and the everyday world. And a name viewed in the context of all the names which surround it can give the grieving some solace in knowing that they are not alone. All of those lost on each day share a common bond, and each moment of grief is shared by many others. In unity, there is comfort.
I think from the time of dedication of the memorial until today, every time I see the memorial standing at one end, looking down its length and the reflections of the monuments in the background, I just continue to think how many of our best and brightest. To me, it's not like the Arlington National Cemetery across the river, where there are just thousands and thousands of headstones, but to have all of these names in rows and rows, panel after panel, is really quite overwhelming. Maya stated one time, and I actually think it's something that many people miss when they're here, but those of us who are Vietnam veterans and are alive, as we stand and look at our reflection in the wall, it is a living memorial. And those of us who are alive, in essence, see ourselves with the backgrounds of those who gave their lives. I have a number of friends' names on the wall, but I've also been very intrigued from the beginning is that in the helicopter crash that where I was a pilot, there are 4 names on that wall who were on the helicopter with me. On that particular day in Vietnam, there were only 6 people killed for whatever reason, because the day before and the day after, there were several hundred. But of the 6 names that were on the wall for October 26, 1967, it's always meant something to me with the 4 names that were involved in my crash, and the fact that I was lucky enough to have survived.
As mentioned, yet another release is provided by the wall when family or friends leave some personal memorabilia or message for the dead at the wall's base. An old photograph, a love letter, a war medal, or a teddy bear. The list is endless. Lovingly placed in front of the panel bearing the fallen warrior's name, those who leave these objects feel a real personal need to leave something of themselves in the care of the wall, something to show that they still care and have not forgotten, or some token of love for the dead to help them on their journey to the beyond. None of these objects, except for fresh flowers, are ever thrown away. Everything left at the wall is saved, stored, and cataloged in a permanent collection comprising some 26,000 items. The items are kept in airtight steel cabinets in a 25,000 square foot warehouse in Lanham, Maryland. The Park Service Rangers pick up items left at the memorial every night, always writing the time, date, and location where the item was picked up. Each item is then given a permanent reference number, added to a computerized list, and stored at the Museum and Archaeological Regional Storage Facility warehouse. This collection is divided into 3 distinct categories: personal items, military items, and archival material. The list of personal items is as varied as it is vast. The military items have included a large variety of medals, from a Purple Heart to a Congressional Medal of Honor, dog tags, parts of uniforms, patches and insignia of all types, and even a grenade pin. The archival material includes postcards, letters, photographs, and books, among many other items. Those whose job it is to watch over the wall and the memories it harbors take great care in making sure that each and every one of these artifacts is treated with the care and respect deserving of these gifts for our heroic dead. The objects which are left are creating an historical context with which we will be able to better understand the wall and everything that it represents in the years to come. They are an integral part of the monument, as important as the foundation that holds the wall secure in its place. They are each an undeniable part of our nation's history. What has become one of the most interesting and emotionally useful facets of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is the ability for visitors to make rubbings of the names carved into its face. The rough and deeply etched letters of each name provide a piece of the wall to take home with them. Like leaving something behind for the deceased to keep, it is equally important for those who journey to the wall to take something away with them. By simply placing paper of the appropriate weight and texture over a name and rubbing with a soft pencil, one can leave the wall with a replica of that name. A handmade and extremely personal memento, the rubbings mean a great deal to those who make them. There is a unique service provided by the memorial staff also. The park rangers will make and mail rubbings of any name on the wall for those who can't travel to the memorial. They will even make rubbings for those that simply can't reach a name. So no matter what your situation, there is a way for you to experience at least some of the emotional power of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. They fought in a war that many didn't like. They came home to a place that really didn't seem to care. Only now is America beginning to understand and acknowledge that the Vietnam veterans deserve and have always deserved our greatest admiration, love, and respect.
Perhaps the question now that the memorial has been built for 10 years is really, what is its significance? What is the importance of this memorial to American society? I believe it has helped heal many wounds. It has certainly brought many Vietnam veterans home, and provided a place where everyone can kind of shake hands and forgive and forget one another's transgressions and differences of opinion over the Vietnam War. It provides an important symbol of reconciliation, an important symbol of unity, and there are an awful lot of people who are too young to remember Vietnam. Indeed, the war ended long before they were born, youngsters and teenagers, and for them this memorial will always be there, not just for them, but to the generations that come after them. This is really a memorial for all times and for all seasons and for all people.
It took one of their own, calling on the veterans themselves to make sure that no one would ever forget what they had given for their country. Like the veterans of all the wars that have come before, they are true heroes. And now, after the war has been over for many years, they are heroes yet again, as they draw the country closer together through the stories of their struggles, pain, and courage. They truly make this country a better place to live. A fitting tribute to the veterans of the war that made America look at itself, the mirror to finish of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial allows each of us, veterans and non-veterans alike, the opportunity to look a little closer at ourselves. And now that healing process has come full circle with the newest addition to the hallowed grounds of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Dedicated on Veterans Day, November 11th, 1993, the Vietnam Women's Memorial has now taken its place of honor directly across from the wall, 300 feet southeast of the statue of the three servicemen. This, the first memorial honoring women's military service to be placed in the nation's capital, began its courageous journey towards completion in 1984. It was the dream of Diane Carlson Evans, a former Army nurse and Vietnam veteran. Designed in the round by sculptor Glenna Goodacre of Santa Fe, New Mexico, the Vietnam Women's Memorial is a beautiful and moving tribute to the more than 10,000 women who served in Vietnam. As we stand in front of the wall looking up at the thousands and thousands of names around us, it's hard not to wonder what they were like. What were their stories? We may not know their faces, and we may not know their history, but because of the wall, we will never forget their names. We were young, we have died. Remember us. We have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done. We have given our lives, but until it is finished, no one can know what our lives gave. Our deaths are not ours. They are yours. They will mean what you make them. Whether our lives and our deaths were for peace and a new hope, or for nothing, we cannot say. It is you who must say this. We leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning. We were young. We have died. Remember us.